The conference room smelled like leather and old money. I had sat in that same room for 22 years, watching the seasons change through the tall windows that overlooked Main Street in Harlow, Virginia. The long mahogany table had seen so many deals closed, so many hands shaken, so many cases won. I knew every scratch on its surface. I had polished it myself when the cleaning crew called in sick one January morning, back in my second year at the firm. That afternoon, the partners were seated at their usual spots. My cousin Wallace sat at the head, his thick silver cufflinks catching the light. His wife Patrice sat to his left, a thin smile painted across her face like something she had practiced in a mirror. Their son, Brendan, barely 26 and 3 months out of law school, slouched in the chair beside her. He had never tried a case. He had never sat with a grieving widow at midnight, helping her understand what her husband's death meant for her finances. He had never done the hard, invisible work that kept this firm breathing. I was 61 years old. I had started at Whitmore & Associates as a scholarship girl from a struggling farm family in rural Shenandoah County. My father grew soybeans and fixed fences to keep us fed. My mother sewed dresses for church women on weekends. I worked my way through night school on a bar association scholarship and studied at the kitchen table after my children went to sleep. And that afternoon, Brendan leaned back in his chair, looked straight at me and smirked. "We can't keep carrying the old scholarship girl forever, Aunt Caroline. It's time to bring in people who actually push this firm forward." The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then somebody laughed. Then somebody else did. My face burned so hot I thought the skin might peel right off my cheekbones. I folded my hands in my lap so nobody would see them shaking. Wallace cleared his throat and began talking about refreshing the firm's energy. Patrice examined her nails. They were talking about erasing me, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces. I sat very still and listened to every single word. My name is Caroline Whitaker. I was born 61 years ago in a 2-bedroom farmhouse outside of Luray, Virginia, where the Blue Ridge Mountains sit against the sky like a painting nobody paid for. My father, Earl Whitaker, was the kind of man who never complained no matter how bad the harvest got. My mother, June, stretched every dollar so far it should have snapped. We were not poor in spirit, but we were absolutely poor in money. I married young to a man named Paul who worked the land beside my father. He was gentle and funny, and he used to sing off-key to the radio while he drove the tractor. Paul died in a farming accident when I was 33. The cable snapped. It was fast. The children, my son, Will, and my daughter, Nora, were 7 and 5. I held it together for them. I did not have the luxury of falling apart. I had been working at Whitmore & Associates for 8 years by then, doing paralegal work, bookkeeping, client intake, and anything else that needed doing. After Paul died, I enrolled in night school under a Bar Association scholarship program for working adults. I studied property law, contracts, civil procedure, and estate law at a fold-out table while my children slept. I passed the bar on my first attempt. The firm was started by my grandfather's brother, Horace Whitmore, years before I was born. The connection made it feel like family, and for a long time, it was. Wallace and I grew up knowing each other. His side of the family had money, mine did not. That difference was always there, quiet and invisible until it wasn't. When I passed the bar and joined as a licensed attorney, I thought things would change. I thought the work would speak for itself. For 22 years I believed that. The afternoon in that conference room was the day I stopped believing it and started doing something about it. I drove home from the firm that evening with tears running down my face. Not pretty crying either. The ugly kind, where your chest heaves and you have to grip the steering wheel with both hands just to stay in your lane. I cried for the girl who had stayed up past midnight studying while her children slept. I cried for every client I had saved from disaster while Wallace took the credit at the annual dinner. I cried because I had given that firm more than 2 decades of my best years, and Brendan had dismissed it all in one smirking sentence. But by the time I pulled into my driveway and sat watching the lights on my front porch, something had shifted inside me. It was quiet and cold, like the moment before a storm when all the birds go silent. I was not going to beg. I was not going to cry in front of them. I was not going to shrink. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I made coffee, sat at the same kitchen table where I used to study for the bar, and I opened my laptop. I updated my resume for the first time in 11 years. It took a while because there was more to add than I expected. 3 major estate settlements that had set legal precedents in the county, a pro bono case that had been written up in the Virginia Bar Association newsletter, a client retention rate that was, quietly, the best in the firm. I made a list of every professional contact I had built over 22 years. Former clients, colleagues from continuing education seminars, people I had helped at state bar association events. The list was longer than I expected too. Wallace stopped by my desk that afternoon. He rested his hand on my shoulder the way you do with someone you feel sorry for. "You understand, Caroline. Business is business. Nothing personal." "Of course," I said. My voice was steady. My smile was professional. Inside, the humiliation had already turned into fuel. And I was just getting started. Wallace's wife, Patrice, called me the next evening. Her voice was warm and smooth, the way expensive lotion feels on your hands, soft on the surface, but leaving a strange film behind. "We just want what's best for the firm, Caroline. You're talented, truly. You'll land somewhere smaller and really shine." She paused. "Something more suited to where you are in life." I held the phone and breathed slowly. "I appreciate you saying that, Patrice," I told her. And then I said nothing else. She filled the silence with more sweet words. I let her talk. When we hung up, I sat still for a moment and thought about what she had just done. She had called to make sure I knew my place. To soften the push so I would step off the ledge quietly, without making noise on my way down. I decided right then that I was going to make a great deal of noise, just not the kind they expected. Over the next several weeks, I worked harder at the firm than I had in years. I reorganized every active file. I created detailed handoff notes for every pending case. Not because I felt I owed them anything, but because I wanted to leave nothing behind that could be used against me later. Every document was clean. Every billing record was accurate. Every client communication was logged. At the same time, I had reached out quietly to Professor Aldridge, my old night school mentor, who had retired to a place outside of Charlottesville. He had watched me pass the bar. He had written my recommendation letter for the firm years ago. When I explained my situation, he did not offer sympathy. He offered something better. "I know a woman named Faye Burton," he said. "She runs a growing estate planning practice in Richmond. She's been looking for someone with deep Virginia County knowledge. Are you interested?" "Yes," I said without hesitating. "Then let's get to work," he said. That night, I enrolled in a specialty certification course in estate and trust law, the precise area the old firm had always ignored. I studied every night after dinner, just like old times. Nobody at the firm noticed the change in me. That was the thing about being overlooked for 22 years. When you start moving differently, they still don't look. I was simply background furniture to them. Dependable, replaceable, easy to ignore. Wallace announced at the monthly partners meeting that they had landed a remarkable new prospect, the Holcomb family, one of the oldest money families in the Shenandoah Valley. Their estate was enormous and complicated, with trust structures going back 3 generations. Wallace sat at the head of the table with his chest puffed out like a rooster at sunrise. "This is exactly why we need fresh energy," he said, glancing at me, and then away. "Complex, high-value work needs sharp minds." Brendan nodded like he understood what any of that meant. I nodded too. Then I went back to my desk. That evening I thought about the Holcomb family. I had actually met Evelyn Holcomb 4 years earlier, at a community fundraiser for the county library. Her younger sister Agnes had come to me the year before that with a small but painful inheritance dispute. I had handled it for free, because Agnes could not afford my rate, and the situation was genuinely unfair. Evelyn had sent me a handwritten thank you note afterward. I still had it in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. I found Evelyn's number through the county bar directory. I called her on a Tuesday evening and reminded her of who I was. She remembered immediately. "You helped my Agnes when nobody else would," she said. Her voice was warm and direct. "What can I do for you?" I did not ask her to pull her business from the firm. I did not say a bad word about Wallace or Brendan. I simply told her I was transitioning my practice and wanted her to know where I was heading. I told her about my estate and trust specialty work. "Then I'd like to talk to you further," Evelyn said. The seeds were planted. I just had to wait for the right moment. 3 weeks later, Wallace came into the office looking like a man who had swallowed something that disagreed with him. His face was tight. His voice, when he finally spoke at our team check-in, had a careful, controlled quality that meant he was working hard not to shout. The Holcomb family had pulled out after a single meeting with him and Brendan. Their representative had cited a lack of confidence in the firm's estate expertise and personality concerns. Wallace used the word inexplicable 4 times in the same breath. He blamed the junior associates. He blamed the market. He blamed the general unpredictability of old money families. He did not look at me once during the speech. I kept my face blank and made careful notes on my notepad. I wrote the word patience 3 times in a row, just to keep my hands busy. After the meeting, while everyone else shuffled out, I stayed to organize my files. I thought about the position in Richmond. Professor Aldridge had connected me formally with Faye Burton the week before, and she had responded quickly. Her email was direct and confident. "Your record is impressive. I'd like to schedule a call." We had spoken for 45 minutes. Faye was sharp and practical. She had built her estate planning group from 5 people to 22 over 7 years. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers. She did not once ask me where I had gone to school for my undergraduate degree, which meant she was interested in what I could actually do, not what pedigree I carried. By the end of the call, she had invited me to come to Richmond for a formal interview. "We're growing fast," she said, "and we need someone who understands the deep roots of Virginia property and estate law. The kind of understanding that only comes from decades of real work." I booked my train ticket that evening. I told no one at the firm. The quiet preparations felt like building a ship in a bottle, slow, precise, and completely invisible from the outside. I scheduled my interview with Faye's firm for a Monday morning, during a vacation day I had saved since February. I dressed carefully. My navy blazer, the pearl earrings Paul had given me on our 5th anniversary, my best leather portfolio. I rode the train to Richmond, watching the Virginia countryside roll past, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a very long time. The offices of Burton and Associates sat on a clean, tree-lined block in the Shockoe Bottom neighborhood. The lobby was modern but not flashy. The receptionist was warm. The conference room smelled like good coffee and fresh paper. These were small things, but they told me something important. This was a place where actual work happened, not just the performance of work. Faye herself was about 50, with short natural hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She shook my hand firmly. She had printed my resume and highlighted several sections. Beside her sat her 2 senior partners, Oliver Strain and a woman named Bea Nakamura, both of whom asked careful, intelligent questions. We talked for 2 hours. They asked about complex trust structures, about managing difficult family dynamics and estate disputes, about how I had built client relationships over time. I answered everything honestly and completely. When they asked why I was leaving the current firm, I said simply that it was time for a change that matched where I wanted to take my career. I did not say one negative word about Wallace. Not one. At the end, Faye closed her folder and smiled. "We've been looking for someone with exactly this profile for 8 months, she said. "We'd like to offer you a senior associate position with a clear 18-month path to junior partner review." The salary was 40% higher than what I earned at the old firm. I accepted on the spot. On the train home, I watched the mountains in the distance and let myself feel, for the first time in months, something close to joy. I gave the firm exactly the notice required by my employment agreement, 2 weeks, not a day more. I typed the resignation letter at my kitchen table on a Sunday night, printed it on plain paper, and placed it in a sealed envelope. The letter was 3 sentences long. It said I was resigning, it gave the effective date, and it thanked the firm for the opportunity. That was all. I handed it to Wallace first thing Monday morning. He read it standing at his desk. The silence that followed was the most satisfying silence I had experienced in 22 years. His face went through several colors before settling on red. "You'll never make it on your own, Caroline. You built everything you have on our name." He said it like a fact, like gravity. "I built everything I have on my work," I replied quietly. "Good luck with everything." The 2 weeks that followed were cold. Patrice stopped speaking to me entirely. Brendan made pointed comments in the break room about dead weight finally moving on. 2 junior associates would not meet my eyes in the hallway, whether out of embarrassment or agreement, I could not tell. On my next to last day, Patrice cornered me in the small kitchen while I was making tea. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said. "Nobody outside this firm knows who you are." I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "More people know who I am than you realize," I said. "I've just been standing in your shadow." She left without responding. On my last day, I packed my personal items into one banker's box. Photographs of Will and Nora. A small painting of the Blue Ridge that had hung behind my desk for a decade. The handwritten thank you note from Evelyn Holcomb's sister, Agnes. I carried the box to my car and set it gently in the back seat. Then I drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror. My first morning at Burton & Associates felt like stepping into a room where the windows had been thrown wide open. The air was different. Nobody spoke to me with condescension, wrapped in a smile. Nobody explained things I already knew, as though I might be confused by the complexity. Faye introduced me to the team at the Monday morning meeting and said, "Caroline brings 22 years of deep Virginia estate practice. We're lucky to have her." That was it. No qualifiers. No soft language, just a plain statement of fact. I got to work. Within the first 2 months, I had reviewed and reorganized the firm's county-level property filing system, which had grown messy during a period of rapid staff expansion. I identified 3 cases where subtle procedural errors could have caused problems at probate and flagged them for correction before they became crises. Faye noticed. Oliver noticed. BA pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You see things other people walk right past. That's rare." By month 4, I had brought in my first new client, a retired school teacher named Harriet from Waynesboro who had heard about me through the county library board. She needed a full estate plan and a family trust. She had been hesitant to trust lawyers because she felt they talked down to her. By the end of our first meeting, she was laughing and calling me by my first name. Harriet told 2 friends. Those 2 friends each told 2 more. By month 6, I had brought in 3 new clients from that single referral chain, all from communities in the Western Virginia corridor where I had spent my whole professional life and where people remembered me from the old days. Not for the firm's name, but for mine. My income was higher than it had ever been. I paid off the last of my mortgage that October. I called Nora and told her, and she cried happy tears. I called Will, and he cheered so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. It was around this time that I got an unexpected message. A woman named Donna, who had been the senior office administrator at the old firm for nearly 15 years, sent me a carefully worded email asking if we could speak privately. We met for coffee at a diner halfway between Richmond and Harlow on a quiet Wednesday morning. Donna was cautious at first. She stirred her coffee for a long time without drinking it. Then she slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of internal memos from Whitmore and Associates. 3 of them were dated months before the conference room incident, before Brendan's sneering comment, before the scholarship announcement, before any of it. The memos showed clearly that Wallace and Patrice had been planning to reduce my role and shift my clients to Brendan as part of a deliberate strategy. They had never intended to keep me. The meeting where Brendan humiliated me was not a beginning. It was the public announcement of a decision that had been made in private without my knowledge, while I was still working 70-hour weeks for their firm. I read through the memos twice. I set them down. I picked up my coffee. "Why are you showing me these?" I asked Donna. She looked out the diner window for a moment. "Because what they did to you was wrong," she said, "and because I know you'd handle this the right way." I made copies of the documents that evening and stored them in a locked file at home. I also sent a scanned copy to a separate, secure email account. I did not share them with anyone else. I did not contact the press. I did not write an angry letter. I simply had them. That was enough. In law, as in life, there is a profound difference between what you can do and what you choose to do. I chose to wait and to continue building rather than tear anything down. Donna left the firm 6 weeks later and found a better position. I wrote her a reference letter that I meant with my whole heart. Back in Harlow, things at the old firm were quietly unraveling. I heard about it through the professional grapevine, the kind of low, careful conversation that happens at bar association dinners and continuing education seminars when people think nobody important is listening. A major client, the Osgood family, had been with Whitmore and Associates for over a decade, managing a complicated generational property trust. I had overseen that account personally for 8 of those years. After I left, the account passed to Brendan. 3 months later, a filing deadline was missed due to a paperwork error that any experienced attorney would have caught in 10 minutes. The Osgoods were furious. They transferred their business. Word traveled quietly, the way all important things travel in small professional communities, carefully, with names attached. Wallace called me on a Thursday evening. His voice had a new texture to it, something thinner and more careful than I remembered. "Caroline," he said, "I think we should talk. There may be a consulting arrangement that could benefit both sides." I let the pause stretch out comfortably. "I'm listening," I said. He proposed that I come back part-time to help stabilize 2 or 3 major accounts that were now, as he put it, in transition. He did not apologize. He used careful business language that was designed to make the conversation feel mutual and practical. He was essentially asking me to clean up the mess that Brendan and his own carelessness had created. "I appreciate the call, Wallace," I said. "I'm very settled in my current position and not in a position to take on additional commitments right now." More silence. "Think it over," he said. "I already have," I told him. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet house for a long time. There was no joy in his difficulty. But there was something honest and grounding in the recognition that the work I had done for 22 years had not been invisible after all. It had simply been taken for granted. Those are very different things. The first full year at Burton & Associates ended better than I had dared to plan for. My client portfolio had grown to 14 active accounts, 9 of which I had brought in personally. Faye presented the year-end numbers at our staff meeting and mentioned my name 3 times. Oliver shook my hand afterward and said, "You've changed the shape of what we're able to do in Western Virginia. That's not small." It was not small. It was the largest thing I had ever built. In January of the new year, Faye called me into her office and told me the firm was entering merger discussions with a larger regional practice called Alderman & Cole, based in Northern Virginia. The merger would triple the firm's size. It would create new service lines, new resources, and new geographic reach. "We want you to lead the estate planning division in the merged entity," she said. "Full division head, your own team, a seat at the leadership table." I asked for 24 hours to consider it. She gave me the weekend. I drove back to Luray that Saturday and walked the land my father had farmed. The mountains were still there, steady and enormous, the same as they had been when I was a girl, carrying water to the vegetable garden in the August heat. I thought about what my father used to say when the hay came in good. "The land doesn't care who you think you are. It cares what you do." Sunday evening I called Faye and accepted. That Monday morning, I passed the old Whitmore & Associates building on my way to a county records office to file documents. There was a small "For Lease" sign taped inside one of the lower windows. It was new. I recognized the paper. It was the same shade of yellow the landlord used for all his properties on that block. I kept driving. I had work to do. Patrice showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon without an appointment. The receptionist at the front desk called back to let me know. I told her to send Patrice to the small conference room and to bring 2 glasses of water. I took a minute at my desk, pressed my palms flat on the surface, breathed slowly, and then walked down the hallway. Patrice was dressed beautifully, as always. She wore a camel-colored coat and her hair was perfect, but her eyes were tired in a way that expensive clothes cannot fix. She stood when I entered the room, which she had never done in all the years we worked together. "Caroline," she said, "thank you for seeing me." "Of course," I said, "please sit." We sat across from each other. She reached into her bag and pulled out nothing. She had come empty-handed, which meant she had come to talk, not negotiate. That told me more than anything she was about to say. "The firm is struggling," she began, "significantly. We've lost 4 major accounts in the last 8 months. 2 junior attorneys left last month. The landlord is asking about our lease renewal and we're not sure we can commit." She paused. She looked at the water glass. "We're family, Caroline. Whatever happened before, you have to know that blood is what matters at the end of the day." I noticed she did not say they were sorry. She said they were struggling. Those are different sentences. "I hear you, Patrice," I said carefully. "I want the best for everyone involved, but I'm deeply committed to my current role and the direction we're building here." She hinted. She circled. She mentioned family loyalty 4 times. I listened to every word with full attention and I offered nothing concrete in return. When she stood to leave, I walked her to the door. We shook hands. It was professional and civil and exactly what it needed to be. I went back to my desk and kept working. One of the first things I did after the merger was finalized, and I officially became head of the estate planning division, was propose something that the old firm would have laughed out of the room. A free community workshop series on basic estate planning, hosted at the Waynesboro Public Library on alternating Saturday mornings. Faye liked it immediately. Oliver thought it was brilliant from a community goodwill standpoint. Bea pointed out that it was also just the right thing to do, and she was correct. I designed the workshops myself, sitting at my kitchen table on evenings after dinner. I kept the language simple. I thought about my father, who had never had a will, and what that had cost my mother after he passed. I thought about Agnes Holcomb, who had nearly lost her sister's modest savings to a distant cousin with a sharp lawyer. I thought about how many people in rural Virginia communities had no idea what their basic legal rights were, because nobody had ever sat down with them and explained it plainly. The first workshop drew 9 people. The second drew 14. By the 4th session, we had to move to the larger meeting room at the library because 31 people came, including a retired farmer who had driven 40 minutes each way and sat in the front row taking careful notes in a composition book. After each workshop, I made myself available for 15 minutes of informal questions. I never sold anything. I never pushed anyone toward a paid consultation. I just answered questions honestly and directed people to resources they could use on their own if that was right for their situation. But the referrals came anyway. People who attended brought their siblings, their neighbors, their adult children. New clients called the firm and specifically asked for me. Word had traveled through communities in Clark County, Augusta County, and Rockbridge County. Places where I had roots and where the Whitmore & Associates name had never really reached. The firm's Western Virginia client base grew 40% in 8 months. Then came the audit. The Virginia State Bar's Financial Oversight Office opened a review of Whitmore & Associates in connection with the management of a shared family trust, a trust that had been set up by my grandfather's generation, and that technically connected both sides of the family. The trust had been under the firm's management for decades, and the oversight had always been handled by Wallace and the senior partners. I had nothing to do with that trust in any formal capacity. But I had kept detailed personal records of every interaction I had ever had with firm accounts, going back 15 years. Old attorneys sometimes called it the when you can't sleep at night file. Thorough documentation kept, not for any specific purpose, but because discipline and precision were simply how I worked. The bar investigator, a careful and precise woman named Audrey Fitch, contacted me professionally and asked if I would be willing to review certain historical documents and provide context from my time at the firm. I consulted with Faye and with the firm's general counsel. They advised cooperation, and I agreed with that advice completely. I met with Audrey twice, both times with our counsel present. I answered every question honestly. I provided copies of the records I had maintained fully and without editing. I did not speculate about anyone's motives or make accusations. I simply told the truth about what I had observed and what the documents showed. I did not contact Wallace to warn him. I did not reach out to Patrice. I did not call Brendan. I also did not use Donna's memos from the meeting at the diner. That was a personal matter, separate and apart from the professional inquiry. I kept those two things carefully separated. The investigation took several months and was conducted entirely by the bar office. I played no role in initiating it and took no pleasure in its existence. Wallace called me the evening after his attorney contacted the bar office. His voice had changed significantly from any previous version I had heard. The confident, dismissive tone was gone. What remained was thinner and more fragile, like paper held too close to a flame. "Caroline," that was all he said for a moment. "Just my name." "Wallace," I answered. "You know the history of that trust better than anyone still living," he said. "You were around when the decisions were made. You understand the context." He was asking me to help him. He was framing it as an appeal to my knowledge, but what he meant was, "Please tell the bar investigator a version of events that helps me." I thought about how I would answer. I wanted to be honest without being cruel, direct without being dramatic. "I've already spoken with Audrey Fitch," I said. "I answered her questions honestly and completely. That's all I can do and all I'm willing to do." Silence. "We built something together," he said. "Our families, our grandfather. Horace Whitmore built something," I said quietly. "I worked hard to protect it for 22 years. What happened after I left is separate from that." He tried several more approaches. He mentioned community standing. He mentioned family reputation. He mentioned what his children might think of their father. I listened to all of it with the phone held steady at my ear. At the end I said, "Wallace, I've always done things the right way. That has not changed and it will not change. I wish you well, genuinely." And I meant it. Not because he deserved my goodwill, but because carrying bitterness is heavy and I had set it down. I hung up and made myself a cup of chamomile tea and read a chapter of the novel on my nightstand. I slept better that night than I had in months. The weeks during the investigation were strange. The professional world in our Virginia circles is connected in ways that are invisible until they suddenly are not. People knew something was happening. Nobody said much directly, but there were longer pauses in conversations at bar association events, careful glances exchanged across rooms. Patrice left a voicemail. I saved it. Her voice in the message was different from the voice that had called me the scholarship kid in the break room years ago. It shook a little at the edges, the way voices do when the person speaking has been crying recently but is trying to sound composed. She said she was sorry for the ways things had gone. She said their family was frightened. She said she knew they had not always treated me the way I deserved. She asked if I could speak to the bar on their behalf. I played the message 3 times. Not to enjoy it, truly not. But because I wanted to be sure I understood exactly what was being asked and what was being offered. What she was offering was an apology attached to a request. The apology might have been genuine. The request was definitely strategic. I thought about how to respond in a way that was honest and kind without making promises I could not keep. I called her back the next day. I told her I appreciated what she had said. I told her I had already been fully honest with the investigator and that there was nothing further I could add. I told her that I genuinely hoped the outcome was fair for everyone involved. She thanked me. She sounded exhausted. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. My practice was thriving. My children were proud. My colleagues respected me. The community workshops were changing lives. None of that had been given to me. All of it had been built in the quiet hours when no one was watching. I did not need anything from Patrice's apology to feel whole. But I noticed, with some surprise, that I held no real anger toward her either. The wound had healed clean. The Virginia State Bar concluded its review and issued its findings in the spring. I was cleared completely. My cooperation had been noted, my records had been thorough, and my conduct at the firm had been found to be without any issue. The bar issued minor procedural warnings to Whitmore and Associates related to trust management practices. The warnings were not public in the way a full disciplinary action would have been. But in our professional community, people knew. The investigators' findings were a matter of public record at the bar office, and attorneys who cared to look could find them. The reputational effect on the old firm was significant. 2 of their remaining major accounts requested copies of the findings, and then quietly began exploring other representation. A senior associate named Perry, who had been with the firm for 6 years, reached out to me through a mutual contact at the Bar Association. He asked if we were hiring. We were. I reviewed Perry's resume and interviewed him personally. He was solid, careful, organized, and clearly relieved to be getting out of a destabilizing situation. I recommended his hire to Faye, who agreed. Perry joined us within the month and brought 2 of his client relationships with him, which he was fully entitled to do. 3 weeks after that, another associate, named Colleen, made a similar inquiry. I reviewed her application with equal care and without prejudice. Her time at Whitmore and Associates was not held against her because she had done nothing wrong. She was hired 2 weeks later. I thought about what it meant that I was now the person making these decisions. For 22 years, I had worked under other people's authority. Now I sat at the table where the decisions were made, and I tried every single day to make them fairly and well. The old firm's office had 2 for lease signs in its windows by June. The summer brought a development I had not predicted. A man named Garrett Phillips had been Whitmore and Associates' most important rainmaker for a decade. He had joined the firm years before I left and had always been professional and courteous to me, though we were not close. He handled primarily commercial property work, but his relationships brought in several estate clients that had overlapped with my practice. In late July, Garrett called me directly. He did not beat around the bush. "I've been watching what you've built," he said. "I've also been watching what's happening at the old firm. I think it's time I made a change." He was not simply looking for a job. He was considering bringing a substantial portion of his client relationships with him, which he had every legal right to do under his existing agreement, which I knew he had structured carefully. I invited him to Richmond for a formal conversation with Faye and the senior leadership team. The meeting was thorough and straightforward. Garrett was direct about what he was bringing and what he wanted in return. We were equally direct about what we could offer. By the end of the afternoon, we had the outline of an agreement. The day Garrett's move was announced in the Bar Association's member bulletin, Wallace appeared at my office. He had not called ahead. The receptionist was flustered. I told her to bring him back. He walked into my office looking like a man who had not slept properly in weeks. His suit was pressed, but his face was not. He pointed a finger at me across my desk. "You're destroying what our grandfather built," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "I'm building what he would have been proud of. The same values, better execution." He left without responding. I watched him go and felt no anger, only clarity. By autumn, the situation at Whitmore and Associates had become what I would describe, in the careful language of estate law, as terminal. The firm had fewer than half the staff it had maintained when I was there. Their lease renewal was in serious question. Their remaining client base had contracted sharply. Brendan, from what I heard through the grapevine, had returned to working for his father-in-law's commercial real estate business. The law career had apparently not taken hold. Patrice called again. This time she did not leave a voicemail. She called on a Wednesday morning and spoke for nearly 12 minutes without pausing much. I held the phone and listened to every word. She described the firm's situation in detail that surprised me with its honesty. The numbers were not good. Their obligations were significant. The staff that remained were worried. Then she said it. The thing I had imagined hearing for a long time, back when I was angry, back when I was hurt. "Caroline, we're begging. We need your help. Come back as a consultant. Name your price, whatever you want." I had thought about how this moment would feel. I had imagined, in the difficult months right after I left, that it would feel like winning, like a flag planted on a hill. But sitting at my desk in Richmond, looking out at the tree-lined street and thinking about Harriet from Waynesboro and Perry and Colleen and Evelyn Holcomb and every person whose legal life had gotten a little bit better because I had been exactly where I was, it did not feel like winning. It felt like the natural end of a long road I had walked with my head up. "Thank you for calling, Patrice," I said calmly. Let me think carefully about what I can offer and get back to you in a few days. I hung up and immediately called Faye. Faye's response was characteristically clear-eyed. If there are viable assets worth acquiring, she said, let's look at it as a business opportunity. Clean structure, fair valuation, full transparency. We brought in our general counsel and an independent appraiser. Over the next 3 weeks, we conducted a thorough review of what remained at Whitmore and Associates, the active client files, the existing contracts, the brand equity of the Whitmore name in the county, the remaining staff relationships. We applied the same professional standards we would to any acquisition. The picture that emerged was mixed. The firm's reputation had taken real damage. Several of the remaining clients were in the process of making decisions anyway. But there were 8 solid, stable client relationships that had been with the firm for 15 or 20 years and who had stayed out of lawyer inertia. There were also 2 junior paralegals who were skilled and deserving of stable employment. I made a formal offer. It was written by our counsel, reviewed by an independent attorney representing Wallace and Patrice's interests, and structured with complete transparency. We offered fair market value for the viable client relationships and the firm name. We offered stable positions to the 2 paralegals. We offered Wallace and Patrice a limited 6-month consulting agreement that would ease the transition and compensate them fairly for that period. It was not a charity offer, it was a business offer, honest, fair, and clean. They had no better options. They accepted. The closing was handled by our counsel with full professional documentation. There was no celebration on our side. I told my team to treat the transition with respect, and that any remarks about the old firm's history were not appropriate in our workplace. The firm's name was changed to Whitmore Burton Estate Planning Associates, honoring both the original founding and the practice that had grown to absorb it. The first staff meeting after the transition was held on a Monday morning in our largest conference room in Richmond. The combined team sat around the table. Our original associates, the attorneys who had joined from Garrett's move, Perry, Colleen, and the 2 paralegals from the old firm. It was a room full of people with different histories and different feelings about how they had gotten there. Wallace sat at the far end. Patrice sat beside him. Their consulting role was limited and time-specific, and both of them knew exactly where they stood within the new structure. They reported to me on matters relating to the transition of the acquired accounts. That was all. I stood at the front of the room and looked at every person there. I thought about what I would have needed to hear on the first day of something difficult and uncertain. I kept it short. We move forward from here, I said. Every person in this room came here through their own path and did their own work to get here. What matters now is what we build together. We treat every client with care. We treat each other with respect. We do the work the right way. Anything from the past that caused pain, we acknowledge it happened, and then we leave it in the past where it belongs. I paused and looked at Wallace briefly. Not with triumph, just with acknowledgement. This firm will be worthy of its name because we will make it so. Every day, in the details. The room was quiet for a moment. Then people began to nod. And then Perry started clapping, and then the room filled with the sound of a new thing beginning. I walked to my seat, sat down, and opened my notebook. We had work to do. Several months after the transition, on an evening when the office had cleared out and only a few of us were finishing up late work, Wallace knocked on my office door. I looked up from the trust document I was reviewing. "Come in," I said. He was dressed informally, which I had not seen from him in years. He sat in the chair across from my desk and did not put on any of the practiced confidence I associated with him. He just sat there for a moment, like a man who had carried something heavy for a long time and was finally setting it down. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," he started. "I've been thinking about it for a while." I waited. "I was wrong about you, Caroline." He said it plainly, without softening it into something smaller. "I was wrong from the beginning, if I'm honest. I looked at where you came from and decided what that meant. I decided you were a temporary situation, a problem to manage." He paused. "You were never that. You were the heart of the place. You were the reason the place worked." I looked at him carefully. His eyes were clear and direct, And the way Brendan spoke to you at that table? He stopped, started again. That was my fault. I raised him to see people the way I saw them. That's on me. Patrice, standing in the doorway, nodded without speaking. Her eyes were down. I let a moment of quiet sit between us. Then I said, I accept what you've said. Truly. I did not say, I forgive you. Not because I didn't, but because forgiveness is something I work on privately, and I don't perform it for audiences. What I said was true. I accepted what he had said, and I meant it. Thank you for telling me, I said. Now let's keep building something worth handing down. Today, the practice I lead bears my grandfather's family name, Whitmore, alongside the name of the woman who believed in me when I was ready to prove what I could do. It is a real firm now, with 29 staff members, 4 division heads, a growing presence in Western and Northern Virginia, and a community workshop program that has served over 340 families. My daughter Nora is finishing her 2nd year of law school. She is focusing on family and estate law. She called me last Tuesday to talk through a complex trust question she encountered in a case study, and we talked for an hour, and I felt something indescribable. The specific joy of watching competence pass from one generation to the next, like a careful hand holding a lamp steady in the wind. My son Will runs a sustainable farming operation in Shenandoah County on land that partly adjoins what used to be my father's fields. He is thoughtful and steady, like Paul was. He called me last month to say that for the first time the operation had turned a real profit, and his voice had the same careful pride in it that my father's used to have when the harvest came in good. I am 65 years old. I wake up before sunrise most mornings because I have always liked the quiet early hours. They feel like the most honest part of the day. I make coffee at the same table where I studied for the bar in my 30s. The table is older now and so am I. Neither of us is fragile. The work matters because people matter. The community workshops matter because knowledge is not something that should only be available to people with money. The firm matters because Horace Whitmore built something worth preserving, and I was the one who preserved it, even when the people who bore his name had forgotten what it was for. I am sitting on my porch this evening watching the sun go down over the Western Virginia hills. The light is the particular shade of copper gold that only comes in late October, when the sky gets serious about being beautiful before the cold sets in. The trees are full of color. The air smells like wood smoke from somewhere down the road. I am 65 years old, and I am at peace with everything that brought me here. They called me the scholarship kid. They said it like it was a mark of shame, like the fact that I had worked and earned my way instead of inheriting it made me less. They laughed in that conference room, and I sat very still and let them laugh. And I drove home crying, and I sat in my driveway in the dark, and then I got up and started building. That is the whole story. That is all it ever was. If you have ever sat in a room where someone laughed at where you came from, if someone has looked at your starting point and decided that was your ending point, I want you to hear this clearly. They were wrong. Your worth is not decided in their meeting rooms. It is built in the quiet hours before sunrise when you are the only one awake and doing the work anyway. It is built in the discipline of doing things the right way even when no one is watching. It is built in the kindness you extend to people who cannot do anything for you yet. The long road brings sweeter justice than any quick revenge ever could. I know this now the way I know the shape of these mountains, not because someone told me, but because I walked every single mile of it myself. Do the work. Stay honest. Do not stoop. The rest follows. If you stayed with me through all 25 chapters, I am grateful for your time. These stories remind us that quiet persistence is the most powerful force in a human life. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, has anyone ever underestimated you because of where you started? I read every single one.